Robby, what's on your radar?
So earlier this week, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed legislation ostensibly aimed at preventing the discussion of sex and sexual orientation in the classroom. The legislation's supporters say that it is an anti-grooming bill that attempts to stop predatory teachers from introducing young kids to sexual concepts or conversations their parents don't approve of. The legislation's critics, on the other hand, call it the Don't Say Gay bill and claim that it would prevent LGBT teachers from disclosing to students that they have same-sex partners. Indeed, some of the bill's detractors say that even heterosexual teachers wouldn't be able to acknowledge their spouses. The Atlantic's Derek Thompson and New York Times' Dana Goldstein pointed out that the specific language is classroom instruction of sexual orientation and gender identity. Thompson and Goldstein think that if a male teacher said, quote, "My wife made me a sandwich today, what is your favorite sandwich?" end quote, to a student, that would technically violate the law. And that, of course, sounds crazy, but even if it is, you can bet that plenty of Florida schools will want a complete and total shutdown of anything comes even close to that so that they don't get sued. So whatever your feelings about the bill are, trial lawyers certainly going to have a field day with it. So personally, while I agree that parents should have the right to prevent progressive educators from talking to very young kids about unsettled and debatable theories about gender, this bill really does go pretty far toward trying to dictate classroom policy at a really unworkable level. And so I'm against this version of it. And so is Disney, which is one of Florida's most important private employers.
Outside the iconic Walt Disney Studios in Burbank, California,
Say gay! Say gay!
Today, dozens of Disney employees walked off the job.
Out here just in support of all of our employees and their families.
An act of protest over Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay bill.
So first, the company didn't say anything, but then Disney employees staged a protest that encouraged the company to speak out. So finally, Disney CEO Bob Chapek came out against the Don't Say Gay bill and apologized for letting down his employees. Quote, "Starting immediately, we are increasing our support for advocacy groups to combat similar legislation in other states. We are hard at work creating a new framework for our political giving that will ensure our advocacy better reflects our values. And today, we are pausing all political donations in the state of Florida pending this review." That threat didn't even cause DeSantis to bat an eyelash. In fact, he said it was a badge of honor to have a woke corporation like Disney fighting him on this. So there's a lesson here for giant companies with progressive values. Republicans like DeSantis actually want you to fight them because it gives them more credibility with their base. But given that Disney has now joined the fight against anti-LGBT legislation and wants to stand up to governments like Florida that enact ostensibly anti-LGBT policies, I have a question for the CEO of Disney. Have you ever heard of Dominica? Dominica, you may not know, is a small island nation in the Caribbean. Dominica's government is very anti-LGBT. Not only is there no gay marriage there, but same-sex sexual activity is actually illegal. Gay marriage is also illegal in Antigua and on the Dutch island of St. Martin, where same-sex couples have to travel to the Netherlands to get married, and if the marriage won't be valid if they then return home. Yet Dominica, Antigua, and St. Martin are all locations visited by a Disney cruise line. So it strikes me as a little odd that Disney would want to denounce the government of Florida for merely approving legislation that makes it more difficult to acknowledge gay relationships in schools, but would continue to give business to an island nation that puts gay people in prison for being gay. And there's China. Gay people can adopt children in China, and there are no anti-discrimination policies on the books to protect same-sex couples. China, of course, is guilty of far worse things, most notably against the Uyghur Muslims, who have been forced into re-education camps in some cases. But Disney keeps making movies in China. In fact, Disney will go out of its way to avoid offending the Chinese Communist government so that its movies can be shown there. That doesn't just seem hypocritical to me, it seems hypocritical to Ron DeSantis. Let's watch.
I talked to the Speaker of the House yesterday afternoon, and he said Disney never called him while they were putting this through the House. They didn't seem to have a problem with it when it was going through. If this was such an affront, why weren't they speaking up at the outset? And yet they won't. And then for them to say they're going to actively work to repeal substantive protections for parents as a company that is supposedly marketing its services to parents with young children, I think they crossed the line. And, people ask me, kind of about, their posture on the bill. I said, you know what? If we would have put in the bill that you were not allowed to have curriculum that discussed the oppression of the Uyghurs in China, Disney would have endorsed that in a second. And that's the hypocrisy of this. And, we're going to make sure we're fighting back when people are threatening our parents and threatening our kids.
So I don't think this bill is very well thought out at all and has a ton of problems. But I have to hand it to DeSantis. That last thing he said, that was a fair point.
Yeah.
And this is the hypocrisy of trying to take personal stands against or boycotts against, no, we won't do business, we can't engage because this is bad, we don't like this thing. But what about all these other things that you're not saying anything about?
It also goes to the kind of strategic question for Democrats and progressives of relying on corporations as your allies in these fights. First of all, what does that mean when your interests run up against them, which as progressives, your interests ought to run up against them all the time. And if they don't, you should be questioning what kind of agenda it is that you're pushing that is so non-threatening to a global company like Disney that they're happy to collaborate with you. But then you're at their whim. And if they decide that they're not going to say anything as this moves through committee in Florida, it just goes through. So if that's your entire organizing effort, just kind of hoping that Disney is going to come to your rescue, then you're going to wind up on the wrong end of a lot of these controversies. Now, I think it's different for Disney employees. If you're a Disney employee, then absolutely, like you organize in your workspace. And I think actually that is what drives an underappreciated amount of this corporate activism is workers at these companies.
Oh, 100%.
Pushing their bosses who push their bosses. And it's just much easier for the bosses to say,
mollify the employees.
Yeah, let's do this. Because it's not, now if they push for a higher minimum wage, then they're going to war over
If
that.
it's as easy as sticking a rainbow flag or sticker on the window, that is an easy way to mollify
Right,
the employees.
it's that meme with the two buttons. You can either put a sticker on the window, or you can give a higher minimum wage.
Sticker.
Corporations,
sticker
how many stickers do you need?
Yeah.
We got all the stickers you need. Until it's a problem for us, and then we don't have stickers anymore. And you still don't get the minimum wage.
Right.
Because now you've been co-opted and bought off.
Right. Yeah, and I think this legislation is bad. I don't know that everything said against it is totally correct. And I do have some questions about curriculum in certain schools, certain ideas that progressives have, not so much about sexuality, but about gender, that I wouldn't want to introduce necessarily to a kindergartner. That I certainly wouldn't want to be clear. I certainly wouldn't want to introduce to a kindergartner. So that is, I think, a legitimate objection that parents have, and I do support the curriculum transparency laws that are being talked about in some other places. Yes, I think parents should have every right to know exactly what is going on in the classroom, exactly what their kids are being taught, and I would also support school choice type stuff. That if they don't, that's my preferred solution. That if they don't like what this school's doing, I would give them the money and let them go to some other school. The kind of trying to dictate exactly what teachers are going to say in the classroom at all times, using the language in this bill, does make it look to me like even acknowledging that you have like a husband or a wife, in a traditional relationship, could possibly get you in trouble with this language. It's not clear, but if it's not clear, some school district officials just going to be like, don't say anything to the kids.
Right. No,
that's kind of dumb.
And you make a good point about the trial lawyers, because if it was just vague, there are a lot of laws that are kind of vague, and you could argue that some things might be prosecuted under there that weren't really intended to be caught up in the scope of it, but no prosecutor is actually going to do that, so it's not that much of a real-world problem. But when you combine the vagueness with the private right of action, meaning that any crazy parent can take this school to court, then you're exactly right. What that does, it doesn't necessarily mean a parent's going to do that, though they might. This is Florida. It means that the school administrators are going to say,
tell them, don't.
And if you've been around administrators, executives, lawyers in this country, they are the most cautious people out there.
Right.
It's like, you know what, this is probably fine, but it's safer if you don't do that, because we don't want to, we don't get in the media, we don't want to get caught up in court, because boom, if you get caught up in court, there goes our science teacher, there goes our art teacher, there goes our after-school resource. Like, it all gets funneled into just fighting off lawsuits from these parents. So just don't go anywhere near. And so they write their own internal rules that are then much stricter than even the vague law. And that's, I think, the purpose here.
Right. Yeah,
and it was a choice to make it a private right of action.
Yeah.
Texas really loved getting around the Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade by making it a private right of action that you can sue somebody for getting an abortion in Texas.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. That one's working its way through the courts, right?
But it's been months now.
Yeah.
So how many women have been deprived of their constitutional rights?
Yeah.
Thousands probably at this point.
And I do think parents have a large right to be very involved in the education process and have certain veto powers at certain points, but that the best way to navigate that is simply just to give the parents more options to find the right the environment that aligns with their values. The trying to dictate it for everyone is just going to lead to it's just a constant battle then. And I don't want it to be a battle. Not all parents agree.
Exactly.
It'll be a constant battle, and it seems like a very unproductive way to go about this.
Not a great use of the courts either.
Not a great use of anybody's time. Well, our rising panel will join us next. Stick around for that.